Hi everyone, my name is Max Aliapoulios. I'm a PhD candidate at NYU Center for Cybersecurity, where I work with Professor Damon McCoy. I did this research in collaboration with others at our lab at NYU. I'll be presenting on our work titled Swiped, Analyzing Ground Truth Data of a Marketplace for Stolen Debit and Credit Cards. In October 2020, one of the largest illicit credit card fraud marketplaces experienced a leak of all of their backend data. This is a screenshot of the login page of the card shop we studied, which already advertises personally identifiable information in stolen debit and credit cards. In this study, we took a stance in line with prior studies for whether it is acceptable to analyze third-party data obtained through unlawful means. We argue that a better understanding of the economic forces and common strategies in financial fraud provide a benefit to society by helping to improve countermeasures and reduce future losses. We also took a number of steps to ensure our analysis does not cause further harm, starting with an assurance that key stakeholders were already notified about affected accounts. In addition, we only report aggregate data, and all PII was either removed from the dataset before it was shared with us or hashed to allow the detection of duplicates but avoid identification of involved parties. Lastly, we operated in compliance with our institution's IRB. Given that the data was leaked, we needed to ensure its authenticity and accuracy. As a first step, we compared the leaked data to crawls by security companies. In addition, we received confirmation that test purchases done on the behalf of banks were indeed in the database. The database also contained Bitcoin wallet addresses, 96.2% of which we were able to find present on the Bitcoin blockchain. In addition to external checks, we also ran several cross-consistency checks of the various data tables internally. A deeper analysis of these internal consistency checks are discussed in the paper. The graphic on the screen presents an overview of the carding ecosystem as it revolves around the shop study. I will take us through each stage in this underground economy in the subsequent slides to present both the business relationships as well as potential economic factors that play into various metrics on the shop itself. It's important to note that the shop and other large-scale underground stolen card shops traditionally segment their marketplace into two distinct categories of stolen goods: dumps, which we call magnetic stripe but are also known as card present, and CVV2, which are also known as cards or card not present, but we call CNP for short. We consider magnetic stripe accounts to be those which were stolen in person from payment terminals. In order for these accounts to be stolen, they must be physically read by a point-of-sale system. A card number is not the only stolen attribute, and the data also includes expiration, cardholder name, and CVV1. These stolen accounts are trivial to clone for physical fraud, as the carder only needs to re-encode the stolen data onto a new blank card. Card not present, or CNP accounts, are a separate category of accounts stolen from online transactions, typically through a piece of browser or device-level malware. Consider a usual online shopping experience where the payment processor typically requires your account number, expiration date, CVV2, and billing zip code. It is possible for all this information to be stolen in CNP fraud. One main difference between CNP and magnetic stripe accounts are that CNP data cannot be used for physical fraud. This is because the carder does not have access to all the data necessary to re-encode a new blank card to use in physical in-store transactions. So up until this point, we've discussed the ways in which cards are stolen. These stolen cards are then supplied to an underground carding marketplace by a shop supplier. It's worth noting that the shop supplier is not always the individual responsible for actually stealing the accounts. In this study, we did not explore the complex carding as a service supply chain, but only consider the stock that has already arrived on the shop. In return for supplying stolen goods to the shop, the supplier will typically receive Bitcoin or another online currency. The shop we studied required the supplier have a specialized seller account on the shop and upload their stock directly through a web interface. The business model for the shop is such that the supplier receives a negotiated percentage cut of the sale proceeds. The other main actor in the shop ecosystem is the customer or individual purchasing the stolen goods from the shop. In this setting, the customer has a profile on the shop that they load with Bitcoin. It's important to note that once a buyer funds their profile with digital currency, the balance cannot be withdrawn. In exchange for Bitcoin, the buyer then has a credit on the shop that they can use to purchase stolen accounts. Every time the customer purchases a stolen account from the shop admin get a cut of the sale. The last step in the shop ecosystem is for the customer to cash out the stolen accounts. Depending on the product they purchase, they do this through in-person or online fraud. Some buyers make massive purchases that allude to complex cash-out stages. However, the shop leak itself did not contain any information about how the stolen accounts were used for cashing out. There is a few back-end data terms that are worth discussing. Releases correspond to batches of stolen accounts grouped and released together for sale on the shop. And inventory corresponds to the total amount of available accounts. In our analysis of over 4 years of data, the shop earned close to 104 million USD in gross revenue and listed over 19 million unique accounts. About 97% of its inventory came from magnetic stripe data, which is commonly used for in-person payment fraud. That being said, customers only purchased 40% of the magnetic stripe inventory, in contrast to the 84% of CMP accounts which are used for online fraud. The exact date range studied was from January 2015 to January 2019. During this time range, the shop added about 38,000 accounts per week, and weekly revenue was mostly driven by USA magnetic stripe accounts. The upper chart on the right-hand side shows the amount of accounts added per week separated two ways by magnetic stripe versus CMP and USA versus international accounts. The lower chart shows the amount of weekly revenue separated again by the same segmentations. Weekly spikes in added accounts were mainly due to large releases. Revenue grew slowly in the first 6 months, however, much differently for magnetic stripe and CMP accounts. The supply rate of new CMP accounts grew at 22.7% per week and only 4% per week for magnetic stripes. Although the supply rate grew faster for CMP accounts, most of them were purchased and therefore the shop had a difficult time supplying more stolen CMP data. As well as studying the supply and demand from a macro level, we also dug into a region supply and demand using the local information in the stolen accounts. This data was normalized per capita for each state in the United States. In terms of magnetic stripes, we saw that South Carolina was the most popular state by about 60% compared to the next highest state. Colorado and Nevada were the most popular in terms of accounts added, but not accounts purchased, as you can see in the left-hand chart. There could be an array of factors other than supply driving the sale of these accounts. For instance, Colorado and Nevada's large supply were due to isolated breaches in those states. Further, the finding that South Carolina was the most popular state is in line with internal shop support tickets that encourage buyers to purchase stolen accounts in southeastern United States because anti-fraud measures were perceived to be weaker in that area. In the case of CMP accounts, the region of the buyer zip associated with the account had very little to do with the purchase. This is likely because these accounts are typically used in online fraud. Accounts on the shop are priced differently, and we also sought to analyze which features of the accounts affect price more than others. An important terminology to review is one called average validity. This is a calculation that the shop admin does every time they receive a release of cards from a seller. According to support tickets, the process involves taking 20% of a release and running it against a group of credit card checkers to determine whether or not the cards are capable of being used for fraud. This calculation is then used to assign an average validity for all the cards in the release. Through a random forest of decision trees, we were able to predict the initial asking price of magnetic stripe accounts with an R-squared of 0.74. We found that 54% of the variance in the price is explained by average validity. This is in line with support tickets that indicate that releases with lower validity have lower prices. In this paper, we discussed the other features used in the model and their impact on the price prediction. We performed the same experiment again with CMP accounts and saw no significant pricing features according to the model. The shop admin typically changed the price of cards after they are listed, and so we also analyzed the price that an account was purchased for. What we saw was that the time on the shop had an impact on the eventual price that an account was sold for. The figure on the right-hand side shows the age in weeks on the x-axis and the purchase price on the y-axis split by magnetic stripe and CMP accounts. What we see is that CMP purchase prices were much more stable regardless of the amount of time on the shop. We suspect this is because CMP accounts do not allow for what is called common point of purchase analysis. This technique allows anti-fraud teams to determine the source of a card breach based on purchase activity of groups of cards in a release. Because CMPs are typically stolen via single victim infections, it's harder to use this technique, therefore accounts stay valuable longer. Support tickets discuss that in the case of magnetic stripe accounts, the longer the breach remains available for purchase on the shop, the higher the chance the bank has detected and reissued those stolen cards, making them invaluable. To dig further into the price differences of magnetic stripe accounts in the United States, we segmented card issuer, card network, and card type. In this analysis, we considered accounts attractive if customers purchased a higher percentage of their available accounts and if they purchased the accounts for a higher price. We segmented issuers specifically into the top 10, medium, and small-scale issuers in terms of total spend. The top 10 issuers constituted 43% of the spending. The spending for each of these issuers were in the millions of US dollars. Medium issuers accounted for 25% of the spending. However, they saw a much larger fraction of their listed accounts sold as compared to top issuers. This holds true for USAA, a top issuer which saw 83.2% of its inventory sell. A similar pattern holds true for the small issuers. They saw a larger percentage of their inventory sold as compared to both medium and top issuers, again except for USAA. This leads us to suspect that buyers are aware of what accounts based on issuer are more or less likely to be viable for fraud. In this section of the paper, we discuss the EMV chip deployment from the perspective of the back-end shop data. A brief note on US EMV chip deployment history. A liability shift occurred on October 1st, 2015 to discourage merchants from processing magnetic stripe transactions instead of using a chip. It is worth noting that other consumer markets outside the US had implemented a similar liability shift prior to that date. As shown in the figure, accounts with magnetic stripe grew throughout the lifetime of the dataset, implying that merchants were still reading magnetic stripe transactions despite the incentive difference due to the liability shift. A note on the market's finances. The shop in total made 23.8 million US dollars. The growth appeared to be because of CMP sales, although magnetic stripe remained the primary source of revenue. A stagnant supply of CMP accounts and the decline of magnetic stripe due to EMV adoption or otherwise would likely force the shop to reduce costs and eventually erode profitability. Some implications and takeaway of this study are as follows. It appeared from the perspective of the shop that the liability shift alone was not enough to discourage merchants from swiping EMV-enabled cards at point-of-sale terminals. Although in 2018, a study by the US Federal Reserve estimated a 20.9% decline in card-present fraud, we saw that US adoption of EMV chip technology and the liability shift did not significantly impact the shop's revenue yet. Carders appeared to have an idea of which banks, card types, and locations are more likely to succeed in fraud. Therefore, it could be worthwhile for banks to collaborate with one another in a data sharing scenario to help boost overall anti-fraud impact. Lastly, one potentially worthwhile study could be to explore whether future trends in the carding underground could be inferred by partial data such as web scrapes. Thank you.